Honored to be joined on the program by Simon Clancy. You can follow him on Twitter at SI Clancy. He does Folding Pocket, he works with Gridiron, and he is one of the NFL draft experts in the United Kingdom. Simon, how's it going, man?
I'm good, Brian. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for joining us. Will Gavin spoke very highly of you, and so I knew if Will spoke highly of you, we had to have you on the NFL End Zone and get you on the rundown and get into everything going on with the NFL draft.
I paid him a lot of money for that, man. A lot of money.
So where can everyone follow you at Twitter, Simon?
So it's at Si Clancy, SI Clancy, CLANCY. So yeah, easy enough to find.
Perfect. And right now, as we speak, the NFL Draft Combine is beginning to get underway. In Indianapolis, I've covered it for years. It just takes over. There's no way around it. We were talking about this morning when Will and I were doing the newest episode of the the rundown on our End Zone program, and you can obviously subscribe, follow, like, get in the comments. There was so much we were getting into, but it's amazing. You're in the United States, and you go after the Super Bowl. There's a little bit of a break, and the NFL Combine is just 24/7, basically wall to wall coverage with interviews with the 40, with the quarterbacks. And while some players, and Shedeur Sanders specifically, have kind of gotten away from it, for some guys, it will make their entire career. You can rise 2 or 3 rounds in the NFL draft with a great showing in the combine. There's one player that right now appears to be on top of everything, even though I'm a little surprised by it. It's Cam Ward, the Miami quarterback. When you look at him, when you watch his game tape, when you break him down, what does he do well, and what does he still struggle with, Simon?
I mean, he's a really interesting player. I mean, he was a 0-star prospect coming out of high school. He went to Incarnate Word. He then went to Washington State, and then had this kind of final great season in Miami. He is he's got high level traits. He's got a big arm. He is a playmaker. He's got a playmaking dimension. He can make plays from the pocket, but also he can move the pocket and throw off multiple platforms. And what I like is that he can, he's got touch and velocity to all 3 levels of the field. He makes plays outside structure, which is incredibly important, especially in the NFL with teams trying to be able to get home with 4 pass rushers and then playing 7 deep. But those 7 guys are players that can attack the line of scrimmage. But where my concerns are with him, there is a significant lack of discipline to his game, and he plays with almost a sort of sense of recklessness at times. He puts the ball up for grabs. He throws from sort of funky arm angles, which he doesn't necessarily need to do, but he can gun the ball into tight windows. He's played almost exclusively out of the shotgun through 3 different collegiate stops, especially in Miami in this kind of spread offense. But he did create his own chances. He created outstanding sort of second opportunity throws where the first 2 windows were shut. He was able to move the platform and free throw. But he drifts a lot off the midline, so that kind of center line where you take the snap, and he does so unnecessarily, so he creates sack problems for himself. And I think just generally, whilst he's got really good upside and there's a kind of an alpha mentality to him, I do have some concerns about some of the technical issues that haven't been ironed out in 5 seasons of college football. And look, this quarterback class is not a very good one, and supply and demand means he'll get overdrafted. So he could easily go number 1 to Tennessee, but that would make me personally feel quite uncomfortable. Were I a Tennessee fan.
Does Cam Ward, does he feel like a number 1 pick to you? Or if you had to compare him to Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, Drake May, it was such a loaded class last year. Would he fall below all of those guys if we were redrafting right now and Cam Ward was in the draft last year?
Yeah, I think you'd put him in that kind of Bo Nix category, and I felt Bo Nix was overdrafted, even though he had an excellent season. And the thing with Bo Nix is that he found himself the perfect landing spot with a head coach who understands quarterbacks, understood what his limitations were in terms of, what he was able to do and what he wasn't able to do. And I think those 2, Peyton and Nix, developed beautifully through the season. And I think Cam Ward's got to find a good landing spot. I would feel very uncomfortable, as I said, taking him with the first overall pick. But like I said, supply and demand is a huge thing when it comes to quarterbacks. And, there are going to be teams at the top of the draft that are interested in him. And I suspect he will go. I personally have Shedeur Sanders rated above Cam Ward, but I would suspect that Ward will go over Sanders just because of some of the sort of peripheral off-the-field stuff that we'll probably get into with Sanders in a little while.
So we'll talk about Shedeur Sanders in a second. I'm sure everyone has seen that he's planning on not throwing during the NFL Combine. He'll throw at his pro day, which is interesting. That's kind of where all this stuff is
Yeah,
going. But
I
go
kind of
ahead.
don't feel that's well. I just think that's kind of been overblown. I think, and that there is a narrative around Sanders in terms of some of that off-field stuff and the relationship that his father has in terms of Dion, the former All-Pro, arguably the greatest cornerback of all time, the Colorado head coach, and some of the things that have been said in the media and some of the attitude things that look, the NFL ownership is a lot of older, white, very conservative politically white men who do not find outspoken young black men to be particularly appealing. And there's been some things that have been said, some things that have been done. Dion has come out and said he wants his son only to play for certain teams, and so there are certainly some things but him not throwing at the combine is completely irrelevant. I am not interested in seeing Shedeur. I'd much rather watch 10 or 15 Colorado games than see him throwing shorts in an airless stadium, with 60 people sitting in the stands. That is irrelevant to me. I want to see him on tape and see how he reacts in terms of how he deals with pressure, all of those things that are important, not him you know running around in flip-flops and shorts and seeing how he gets on. That's not relevant to me.
One of the players who is on that team that was a talk of being number one overall, and obviously had a fantastic career at Colorado, a fantastic season, Heisman Trophy winner Travis Hunter. What do you think about Travis as a pro? And the question that we're already trying to answer is, where does he play? Where is he best at? Could he actually play both ways? We, speaking of Deion Sanders, we really have not seen that, especially consistently at a high level in the NFL. What does the NFL make of someone like Travis Hunter?
Yeah, he to me is one of the most fascinating studies to come out of the draft in many, many years. And like you say, the question is cornerback or wide receiver. And I think ultimately he'll probably end up playing corner. I've got him listed as a corner because I think that's where he's best suited. But I also think whoever drafts him is going to have to try and use him as a sub package receiver, where he's obviously naturally athletic. He's got great hands. He can go up above the rim and make outstanding catches. He can convert catching straight into picking up yards after the catch, and he's got this kind of rare explosiveness. But he's still raw as a receiver, and I wouldn't have him as the number one receiver in this class. Whereas I think he's probably him and Will Johnson, coming off the Michigan kid, coming off a turf toe injury, are probably the two best corners in this draft. But you know, he is long and slight. I mean, a colleague of mine, Peter Bukowski, called him as a receiver. He said he's Jamar Chase with a Zempic, which I think is a really good kind of. He's very slight, he's very thin, but he's an explosive mover. And when he plays man at corner, he rarely allows separation. He closes. He's got this kind of rare burst to close, but he's also got great FBI, great football intelligence. He can, in zone, he can come off his man. He can bait his opponent into questionable throws, and I think he's as good as anybody in the draft at cornerback, and potentially the best to come out since Patrick Surtain 3 or 4 years ago. I think you look at in terms of the numbers, his single coverage, his man coverage rate is extremely high. You look at he plays man at 33.8%, which is the highest of any corner drafted in the last few years in terms of man coverage. When you look at Sauce Gardner, was 21.1%, Derek Stingley was at 29.7%. So this is a guy that is absolutely used to playing man coverage all the time. He's going to create plenty of big plays at wide receiver. The one thing that concerns me about receiver, and the one thing that concerns me about his value, it is a longevity issue with him. He has taken a lot of snaps at wide receiver and corner in college at Colorado, and he stayed remarkably healthy. It is a completely different proposition playing those two positions in the NFL, and his value depreciates year on year in terms of playing in both sides of the ball. He may play. He might have 35 catches as a receiver as a rookie in the NFL, but that number and the number of plays that you use him on offense will go down year on year on year, because his body just isn't going to be able to hold up to playing the 100 and 120 snaps he's been playing at Colorado. And I think whilst he will be a very good cornerback, the kind of the rareness of that package, having him as a number 2/number 3/third down receiver, is going to depreciate because his body just won't be able to hold up.
And that's interesting too, because if you're talking about somebody who might go number 2 overall, who was number 1 pick, that you're investing, you're not just investing roster spots with him, you're investing salary cap space and someone who
Absolutely.
you need on the field. You draft somebody in the top 5, top 10. You're planning in an ideal NFL world that they are on the field for you constantly as a starter. I think it's a great point. Let's go ahead and get into Shedeur Sanders, and you mentioned him a little earlier, but you know what do you think? You look at these teams right now, and it's early in the mocks. The quarterbacks always rise. We saw that last year, where all of a sudden you had 6 quarterbacks going that early. But you look at Sanders. Is there a team that you think is an ideal fit for him? You mentioned earlier Dion throwing out there the whole idea of like, hey, we don't want him going to a bad team. We don't want him going to a cold weather city. We want him going to an ideal spot. Is there an ideal team for him? And where do you value him in your top 5, top 10 right now?
I think he's a Sean McVay offense type of guy, and actually, ironically, the quarterback that I think he shares the most similarities with is actually Mike McDaniel's quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa, because he is a rhythm and timing thrower. He is incredibly accurate. He doesn't have the strongest arm, but he's a spot thrower. He's a very, very accurate spot thrower who likes to throw the ball down the field. So I think fitting in one of those sort of McVay style offenses, whether that's McDaniel, whether that's Kyle Shanahan, whether that's Kevin O'Connell, McVay himself, I think that's where he would be the best fit, because his greatest plus is this elite accuracy to all 3 levels of the field. He can hurt you because he can put the ball wherever he wants to put it. And this is a kid that just loves to throw the ball. As I said, he's intentional when he does so. He's a shotgun, quick processing, get the ball out quickly, drive the ball down the field. But like I said, it'll take a leap of faith from a general manager to embrace the inevitable circus. The Giants have shown a significant amount of interest, and I know that general manager Joe Schoen has been on the campus in Colorado a number of times. He's been to a number of games, and what I love about him is apart from the accuracy and that kind of just that sort of childish mentality of just putting the ball down the field, is also how tough he is. I mean, he's had 99 sacks in the past 2 seasons, which is astonishing. But he can make plays by climbing in the pocket. He can escape laterally. There's a big concern. He tends to move backwards too much when pressure comes. He tends to drift backwards and then take sacks. He just won't be able to escape, players in the NFL in terms of those kind of quick edges. He floods himself into hungry rushers. But I think he's a really good decision maker. In terms of where I'd have him overall, it's the same as with Cam Ward. It's a supply and demand league. Is Shedeur Sanders a top 10 pick? It's a pretty bad draft overall, I think, in terms of quality. I think he's probably a sort of 10 to 15 overall talent. He might go 3rd to the Giants. He may go 15th. It just depends on how teams view him and how the board is going to get stacked. But I like him. I like the mentality. You can't argue with the lineage in terms of his father. And there are some tremendous throws on tape done under huge pressure. And he's clearly a very good leader. So it will be, as is Ward. So it will be very interesting to see where he ends up. And I think both of them can start fairly quickly. Both of them understand the nuance of the position. And if they find themselves in the right scheme, then it could be, you could see 2 fairly early starters.
That sounds like the NFL draft to me. You might be the 15th best talent, but you're going to go number 3 overall. Yeah. That's how badly the NFL.
And it's all about fit, Brian. It really is.
It's
all about fit. If these players, so oftentimes, historically, you look at why did a player fail? Why did player A end up? I'm a Miami Dolphins fan. And I go back to the Dolphins many years ago drafted a cornerback called Jamal Fletcher, who'd won the Thorpe Award out of Wisconsin. The Dolphins at the time had 2 very, very, very good man cover corners in Patrick Surtain, the father of Patrick Surtain Jr. of the Broncos, and Sam Madison. Jamal Fletcher was a zone corner at Wisconsin, and Dave Wanstead was the head coach, and they really wanted to turn Fletcher into a man corner because they thought he could do it, and he just couldn't. He didn't fit the scheme. He really struggled. He ended up in Green Bay. Kind of his career flamed out, and he was a really good prospect, but it was just the scheme fit was just so bad, and this happens a lot. And with quarterbacks, I think if you can find the right head coach and there's a little bit of patience, and you can adapt the offense to what they do best rather than them having to fit your system. You fit the system around the quarterback. You've made this huge investment in them. I think that's just so beneficial to that position, and where these 2 end up will be huge in terms of how they move forwards.
Speaking with Simon Clancy, you can follow him on Twitter at Cy Clancy. Simon, let's get this one, and we need a short answer on this one because I have a feeling it might take 1,000 words to answer it in a really good way. How did you get into this? Because I've been covering the NFL for 20 plus years. I've covered drafts and combines and done hundreds of interviews, but you obviously, I can hear it right now. You know this stuff. You know the history. You know the details. You put together your own scouting report. How did you get into this and become which is just a niche thing for a lot of people 15, 20 years ago? How did you get into this? I think it's fascinating when I hear the accent and I'm like, this guy knows it better than just about anyone in the United States of America.
That's very sweet of you. I got into the NFL literally. This was my 40th Super Bowl. It's my 40th year as a fan. I went to a children's birthday party to watch Ghostbusters with a friend of mine who I played football with at the kind of under 11s football team. And whilst all the kids were getting ready for like cake, I was sat in front of there used to be a program called ITV's Wide World of Sport, and they were showing this guy who wore number 13 for the Miami Dolphins just throwing lasers around the field. And I'd never seen this game before. I was like, wow, what is this? And yeah, and that was it. I kind of just got obsessed with the game. Used to listen to college football every Saturday night in on the Armed Forces radio and Sunday night on Armed Forces radio. And that was it. That's how I got into the game. Just became utterly, utterly, utterly obsessed with it. And yeah, and the draft. There's nothing like it in English sport. The ability to to allow the worst team to pick the best player, or arguably the best player in college football, and have that parity. I just found that so fascinating that kids had no idea where they're going to end up, and the surprise and the drama of it all. And the draft is the most exciting non-sporting event in the world. So, or the most exciting non-sporting sporting event in the world. So yeah, that's kind of it. That was my reasoning.
That's super cool. All right, we'll get two more in here really quick on talkSPORT's End Zone, and be sure and subscribe. We'll be covering all of this for the next couple months, and we'll be doing free agency, the rundown show of Will Gavin. We're doing so much. We were just at Super Bowl for the last 10 days. One guy who, when I start looking at the mocks, his name just keeps popping up. That's Abdul Carter. When you look at him, when you rate him, when you watch his tape, now, is he somebody who's worthy of a number one pick? Does he have number one pick potential?
Yeah, he's the best player in the draft for me, Brian. I mean, he's an absolute physical freak. He is a disruption monster. He's a Sunday game wrecker. And you only had to see in the Super Bowl, how Philadelphia were able to dominate. So even in the playoffs, throughout the playoffs, but also then in the Super Bowl, how they were able to dominate with that defensive line. He has got unbelievable bend and this quick twitch athleticism that you could quickly see him become a double-digit sack artist in the NFL. And I think he's the only true tier one pass rusher in the draft. He was an inside linebacker who kicked up to edge in 2024, and he is like, Gumby. He is so bendy. His size goes against him a little bit in the run game. And he can get moved out by tackles and even occasionally by tight ends. But there's also times where he just runs through people's chests in the run game because he's just desperate to get to the ball. But as a pass rusher, he is so quick off the ball. His first two steps are insanely fast. His change of direction at the top of the arc. If the tackle runs him wide, he can cut back inside and change, flatten, bend, and then explode to the quarterback. I was watching the other night against USC. He took 3 steps, sort of slow steps off the snap. Suddenly he ducked inside to the right, ducked back outside, and he got to the top of the arc at the corner, and his explosion to the quarterback was just phenomenal. I had to watch it about 7 or 8 times just to. And when he arrives at the quarterback, he arrives with menace in mind. He really wants to hurt somebody. So I think his contact balance needs improvement, and I think his strength against the run needs improvement. He's on the floor quite a lot, but his ceiling is enormous. His ceiling is massive, and we're all prisoners of the moment in this kind of thing. But it's rare to see bend like I can't remember seeing a guy with this much bend in the last 4 or 5 years.
Last one for you, Simon. We really appreciate it on talkSPORT. I remember doing this last year and talking to Daniel Jeremiah from NFL Network and Matt Miller from ESPN, who obviously know their stuff very, very well. And, the name Cooper DeJean came up, and I knew him from college. He was not somebody who was going to go in the top 10. He was overlooked. And the idea was, hey, out of everyone out there in the first round, second round, Cooper DeJean has the potential to just be absolutely fantastic. We saw that all season. We saw that in the Super Bowl with his pick six that completely changed the game. Who is your Cooper DeJean right now? I know we still got a couple months to go before the actual draft, but who is somebody who's first rounder, but really is being overlooked and undervalued right now for whatever reason?
I think there's a tackle out of Missouri called Armon Membo. People talk about Kelvin Banks of Texas and Will Campbell of LSU. I think Membo is an extremely good. He's a right tackle, but he just looks like a first-round player. He's outstanding in pass protection. He's a real finisher in the run game, and he's just 20 years old. I think Membu is a really good player. One of the more interesting players, he might not go in the first round. He's probably a top 40, top 45 guy. There's a linebacker at UCLA called Carson Swessinger, who people just won't know anything about. But I'm not sure if there's a player in the draft who's made a bigger sort of 0 to 60 impact than he has. He was a walk-on and a reliable backup at UCLA. He came in as a 1-year starter, and he just, He was a Butkus Award finalist. His diagnostic skills are absolutely elite, which gives him a leg up on everybody because he's just one step ahead of everybody else because he knows exactly where he's supposed to be at exactly the right time. He's not a thumper. He's 230 pounds. But everything he does so well is in his head. And I think, if you can keep him clean behind big defensive tackles, he is going to just hoover up tackle after tackle after tackle. And I think this is a draft, like I said right at the top, that it isn't a great draft. I don't think it's going to go down as a classic. And I think in that second half, you're going to see lots of players that you're probably not going to expect. Whether that's a Jade Barron of Texas, Braden Swinson at LSU. I talked about Member, who might go in the top 10, top 11. Elijah Arroyo, a tight end at Miami. I think he had a great Senior Bowl coming off a great season. I think he could sneak into the back end of the first round. But to me, Swessinger is just a fascinating guy, a guy who had teams had no interest. He literally, as I said, walked on at UCLA, and now he could end up going in the first round of the NFL draft.
Simon, we really enjoyed this. This was fantastic. Be sure and follow him on Twitter at SI Clancy. Subscribe, like the channel, follow Will on Twitter. You can follow me at BT Smith UK. And I'm going to be completely honest with you, having done hundreds of these in the last 10 years or so. You definitely, Will spoke highly of you, and he was right. You know this stuff better than anyone, just about anybody I've come across. So a tip of the cap to you, and thanks for helping us out on talkSPORT.
That's very kind of you. I really enjoyed speaking to you, Brian.